Hello and welcome to the table, Baldurs Gate, DND, and Warhammer friends from the Total War and Fantasy communities. Have a seat, grab your favorite drink, and settle in for a unique modded character build and concept, the Khainite Assassin. Now, specifically the main class we will be using is the Bloodletter, which is a modded rogue subclass and multiclassing with it. Now, if you want to see the full in-depth video on that class alone, and all 12 levels and the features that come along with it, I will leave the link to that specific video in the pinned comment below, as well as the mod class itself, plus a few other mods that I use to complement it too. And also, huge credit to the mod author 72 Division for coming up with the class concept. Now, for the new viewers to the channel, one of my main focuses for videos is creating unique Baldurs Gate 3 characters, utilizing mods both for enhancement and roleplay purposes, giving you different types of replayability. And if you're really into different types of replayability and also character concepts, I would also love to hear your personal favorite character builds in the comments below. And let's get a discussion going on what characters that you would specifically build your concepts around, and also what your favorite multi-class combinations are. And also, as a side note, I do have videos of narrative-driven Total War Warhammer campaigns that I create along with these character build videos. And these campaigns are both of modded and non-modded factions, just to show and tell unique stories of each of the individual leaders. So, if you like talking shop about character builds, or also just watching the epic story-driven war campaign playthroughs, consider hitting the like, subscribe, and bell icon notifications for those unique adventures. Also, for new viewers who only stumbled upon this video, the way I want to structure this character build is going through the starting level with choices in race and other beginning features, levels 2 through 12 with the majority of this build being the Bloodletter, but I'm going to sprinkle in some other classes to synergize well with it, and then wrapping up with specific gear and equipment to complement the build in terms of roleplay or improving upon the stats and spells featured. Now, I do want to make a quick lore overview for the viewers not familiar with Warhammer Fantasy, and specifically, I do want to make this lore overview about the Khainite Assassin. I'm going to do my best to not ramble on too much here with the backstory, but also Warhammer Fantasy lore masters, please let me know in the comments if I left out any important information that would be super relevant with the character build and keeping in line with what a Khainite Assassin truly is. Now, Khain is essentially the elven god of war, blood, ruthless murder, everything that's kind of the negative side of the elven race. It's also, the thing with Khain is he's a necessary evil for elves in general, but the high elf race worships him as kind of a means to an end right before battle, also being self-aware enough not to give in to his bloodlust. However, the dark elf race specifically embraces him fully, and also his most devoted servants take up the mantle of the Khainite Assassins. They do utilize typical tactics of other assassins like infiltration, the use of poisons to cause debilitating effects, and also giving them an edge in combat with terror tactics. Now, the goal I want to do with this build is not to just create your stereotypical type of assassin character, but to also make it thematic with the use of blood abilities and spells that are featured by the mod author. It's kind of my way of saying thank you to the mod author, but also to really just give a unique twist on the build. Now, without further ado, let's get into the first level, friends. Now, at starting level, it may seem very odd that we are using human, especially because it can seem basic, plus also breaking the lore of Warhammer Fantasy because Khain is specifically an elven god, but we are using the variant human mod to enhance the build, and also we're using other mods, appearance mods specifically, to give the character more of an elven look. I know it can be very much of a stretch, but we can even go so far as to say this quote-unquote variant human is half elven. The features do look elven enough in my opinion, And specifically with the different race passives, we have a huge variety that we can choose from. This can also, side note, be really good for other different class and character builds that I have in store for the future too. Now for the first passive, we're going to choose Resiliency and Wisdom, gaining a Wisdom +1 and proficiency in Wisdom saving throws. This may seem very minor at first, but as we progress through the build, this will pay off very well in the early game. The second feature is Fast Hands, granting us an additional bonus action, and my returning viewers will know how much I harp on action economy and also being able to have potentially another extra attack as well, which is going to help us with crowd control and also dishing out even more damage overall. Last but definitely not least is Unarmored Defense. Your reflexes are as effective as any armor. While not wearing armor, you add your Wisdom modifier to your armor class. This is major for this build, as roleplay wise, Khainite Assassins don't necessarily use a whole ton of armor. If anything, they will use light armor, but also Wisdom is also going to be our casting modifier for the blood abilities and spells, so this is essentially really not just leaning into but doubling down on our Wisdom to grant us defense and also offensive capabilities. Starting class is of course going to be Rogue with different sneak attack features, and yes, I am also adding a mod that enhances the sneak attack and other features of the Rogue, but also we will get access to the Bloodletter class at level 3. Background, for roleplay purposes and also for usefulness, I'm going to pick up Criminal, granting us skills in Deception and Stealth. Stealth, really good for combat. Deception, really good for roleplay and also dialogue choices. And for the ability output modifier, this seems a little wonky, but hear me out. Now, even though most rogue builds rely so much on dexterity, the fact that the mod author has stated that Wisdom is going to be your casting modifier and also reliant on damage output means that we are going to assign 2 points into Wisdom, and thanks to us picking up Resiliency and Wisdom, it gives us that extra point, which turns it from a 17 into an 18, making it a very strong +4 in the early game. Dexterity will be our second highest with a bonus of a +1, and getting out to 16, meaning we're going to have a respectable +3. Constitution also going to be our third highest at a respectable +2, but in order to really min-max everything out, we're going to be taking points away from Strength, Intelligence, leaving Charisma alone. Strength we're not going to worry about too much, Intelligence also not going to worry about too much either. As well with the skill proficiencies, to keep in line with what Khainite Assassins are all about, we're going to have a +5 in Acrobatics, +7 in Sleight of Hand, +7 in Stealth, +6 with Insight, +6 to Perception, +2 to Deception, and +2 to Intimidation. At second level, nothing really much to be said here other than getting the cunning actions of Hide, Dash, and Disengage. Level 3 is when we actually get access to the Bloodletter class, gaining subclass features of First Blood. Upon landing a successful attack on a full health enemy, the Bloodletter splatters blood, creating a blood surface at the point of impact. The blood surface we're going to get into more detail with some of the later abilities. Anatomist, you gain advantage on attack rolls when your target is bleeding or severe bleeding, and gain expertise with medicine. Blood Tracing Aura marks any foes that come into contact with blood puddles, potentially revealing the presence of invisible foes. Gain advantage on attack rolls. I like this ability here as it's a nice status debuff to those annoying invisible enemies, and it's your way of anti-roguing, if that makes sense. We also gain actions of Crimson Blink, traverse to any available blood surface. Movement can't be executed when threatened. This is essentially like a teleportation or get out of jail free card if you find yourself you're losing in melee combat. Bloodletting is going to help you in melee combat as well. Intentionally draws blood. If the target is hostile, inflict bleeding and severe bleeding. Otherwise, purge the target from disease, poison, paralysis, or blindness and heals. So with this, it can double as a supportive role action with healing your teammates, or also causing the bleeding effect and damage over time for enemies. And hence the reason why I decided to pick up Fast Hands earlier, because that's going to help a lot with the bonus actions of these different abilities. At level 4, we gain the subclass feature of Siphon Blood. Stepping into a blood surface heals the Bloodletter, amount equal to your proficiency bonus. Your action gain here is Sanguinary Projection, throws a blood jar onto a surface, forming a blood surface. Creatures within the space become bloody drenched. When they're bloody drenched, prevented from burning, resistant to fire damage, but vulnerable to lightning, cold, and necrotic damage. It is also permanent for them. As for the feat, I'm going to pick Ability Improvement, and because we decided to put a point into Wisdom earlier on, this ability here now allows us to max out Wisdom at level 4 in the early game stage, so now it's overall a very strong +5 to our Wisdom checks, and also future abilities too. Level 5 is when we gain class features of Uncanny Dodge, cutting the damage done to us in half, and also I am using a modded Cunning Strike feature. With this modded Cunning Strike, when you deal sneak attack damage, you can forego one of the damage dice to withdraw, or attempt to disarm, poison, or trip the target. The modded Cunning Strike adds a whole bunch of different versatility when it comes to your sneak attacks too. One of your main actions you gain at this level is Exsanguinating Strike. Following a successful sneak attack, you can seamlessly transition into a melee strike and deals additional 7 necrotic damage. Now, this is a very situational extra attack feature too. You do have to successfully pull off that sneak attack, but it's a nice, not so much risk, but more so of a reward if you're able to get that sneak attack in with a successful medicine check, cause bleeding and severe bleeding. At level 6, we can change our skills if we want, but the main feature here is Autopsy. Now, bear in mind too, this can only be done to humanoid or undead targets. It can't be pulled off with Mind Flayers or also Devils. I've checked myself. You execute precise dissection and deals 3 to 18 additional force damage. This is considered a sneak attack. Level 7 is when we gain the evasion feature of having damage done by spells, or also if a spell does half damage to us, we take no damage at all. We also gain the main feature here of Bloodbane Corruption, potentially up to 66 necrotic damage, corrupts blood puddles, deals 8 to 48 necrotic damage on any foes standing on blood surfaces. Targets with the bleeding or severe bleeding status suffer an additional 3 to 18 necrotic damage. This is massive amounts of overall damage potential to cause to our targets, and possibly applies corrupted blood. Now, this class action here, it can be a bit of a stretch. I know the Warhammer lore friends in the community will say something around the lines of Witch Elves or Khainite Assassins not necessarily having this ability, but it's definitely in line with the class, and also this could be used as a bonus feature too. Dark Elves in general for the Warhammer Fantasy Universe tend to dabble in a bunch of dark magic themselves, and this is really right up their alley. Now, level 8 is going to be our last level for the Bloodletter class. I know it seems like the majority of this class is so much focused on the Bloodletter. Like I said, this is going to be thematic, and the last few levels, we're going to choose another modded class to complement the features. And most importantly of all, just provide different types of versatility and options when it comes to combat. Now, with the last level, subclass feature gain here is Surgical Precision, deal an additional character weapon damage 2d6 plus our Wisdom modifier. Now, bear in mind our Wisdom modifier is now a very strong +5. necrotic damage as well when attacking a foe with advantage, targeting their vulnerable wounds. We also gain the action of Hemorrhage Ritual, sacrifice half of your current hit points and enter Blood Tribute status. Now the thing here is this is a nice risk and reward here. Gain an extra action when landing a killing blow, regain 1 blood essence and heals you. So it's that's the thing with the Blood Tribute. For 3 turns we do gain a lot of positive effects at the expense of losing a lot of health too. Now, for the feat selection here, I would personally pick up Savage Attacker. That is just my personal playstyle. If you have a difference of opinion on any of the feats, or also leveling choices too, just let me know in the comments what you would personally pick or swap out. I personally decided to go with Savage Attacker just because it allows us to roll our damage dice twice and using the highest result. The highest result being the fact that we can guarantee that we get the most out of every single attack that we do, which is really in line with what a Khainite Assassin is all about. Now, at level 9, this is when we're going to multi-class into Samurai. Now, right off the bat, some of the main features such as the cantrips and actions here from the Samurai that you gain at first level really lean well into the theme and concept of the Bloodletter and also the Khainite Assassin build. With your cantrip Higanbana, it's weapon damage, but you spend 1 sen, which is essentially like a key point, to make a melee weapon attack of a bonus damage of 1 to 8. On a successful hit, the target suffers bleeding damage at the start of each of its turns. Now, the fact that we can also use sen and also a separate, essentially, mechanic different from Bloodletter allows, like I said, versatility with bleeding for 4 turns. Main action here is Hakaze. Starting a samurai combo on a successful hit, you gain access to an additional extra attack. Now that's the thing here, this is also a situational extra attack action here, but at the same time it will reward you if you're able to land those hits. We also gain the class feature of Hakaze. At second level of Samurai, we will gain class features and cantrips of Third Eye, reduce slashing, piercing, and bludgeoning damage by 1d8. This will stack up with the Uncanny Dodge feature as well, essentially providing us like a very dodgy tanking opponent for our enemies. Cantrips of Tenkagoken, weapon damage 4d6 slashing. You can spend 2 sen now to make a melee weapon attack. On a successful roll, target takes 4 to 24 damage and stun for 3 turns. On a failed roll, target takes half of the 4 to 24 damage and is crippled for 3 turns instead. Now, the potential for stunning your enemies for a whole 3 turns really is something right up a Khainite Assassin's combat feature, just because of the fact that one of the things that they do in Total War Warhammer is locking the enemies into combat with them and providing those negative status effects to keep them from doing damage to them, and then thus they themselves being able to dish out that damage. Now, at third level for Samurai, we gain class features of Iato, gain initiative +3, and you can no longer be surprised, allowing us to go first in combat. Cantrips of Madare Setsugeka, 7d8 slashing damage. Spend all of your sen to make a melee weapon attack. On a successful hit, weapon deals damage of 7 to 56. And we gain the counter strike feature here. Use a reaction to counterattack, dealing 1 to 12 extra slashing damage. I like all of these features here too, especially the reaction feature, as essentially it allows us to not just stand our ground in combat, but also even if an enemy does deal damage to us, we can really dish that damage back to them. And finally, at level 4 Samurai, we gain Meditation, giving us 2 to 8 healing. Spend 1 sen to recover those hit points, and it may seem minimal, but at the same time, the fact that we could potentially use it in combat in a pinch can really help us out in survivability. and this is just a personal preference for me. I like picking up defensive duelist. When attacked while wielding a finesse weapon you're proficient with, you can use a reaction to add your proficiency bonus and your dex modifier to your armor class, possibly causing the attack to miss. I like the idea of having the chance to essentially make your enemy miss an attack on you and then retaliating with the counter strike feature, thus also not just negating damage to you, but then even also getting something out of it in return. Now, when it comes to the equipment and weapon choices here, it may seem like they oddly are a mix and match, but also they synergize surprisingly well. Plus also, when they're together, it kind of looks like the garb of a witch elf or a very feral Khainite Assassin. Now, for the headpiece, this seems very basic, but Scabby Pugilist Circlet, Martial Bravery, weapon and unarmed attacks deal additional 2 damage while surrounded by 2 or more foes. It may also seem situational, but this is specifically as an anti-crowd or specifically crowd control type of equipment. Flesh Melter Cloak. When a creature deals melee damage to the wearer, the creature takes 1 to 4 acid damage. This is going to pair really well with the counter attack by the Samurai class, and also essentially kind of like a reflect damage, but well, spitting acid in their face essentially. Bone Spike Garb. Now, unfortunately, we don't have the rage feature with this build to gain those temporary hit points, but also we'll gain the exoskeletal endurance, and this doesn't count as armor for us. Reduce all incoming damage by 2. When the wearer is struck by a melee attack, the attacker takes 2 piercing damage, pairing up well with both counter attack and also Flesh Melter Cloak. Now, like I said too, this doesn't count as armor, and thus we still gain the unarmored defense bonus. Bone Spike Gloves. Exoskeletal Reinforcement. Attacks ignore resistance to slashing, piercing, and bludgeoning damage, so enemies can't tank you, or also you can essentially get those maximum amount of damage points in. Bone Spike Boots. This is a little odd choice here too, but I mainly got it for Brutal Leap. This is going to be kind of like our offensive movement ability here. Leap at a target, possibly knocking it prone. While they are prone, you will gain advantage on attacks against them. You also get a +1 bonus to your armor class and saving throws as long as you're not wearing armor or holding a shield. For your amulet and also rings here, Amulet of Ball. First blood on a hit, inflict bleeding upon targets that have max hit points. So this is going to be something that you can say is very akin to an aggressive playstyle and rewards that aggressive playstyle by dishing out those bleeding and damage over time. Killer Sweetheart. When you kill a creature, your next attack roll will be a critical hit. I found myself using this often with some of my other builds too, because of the fact that one of the strategies is to kill off a minion or minor enemy and then gaining that option to land that next critical hit on a more difficult enemy or boss enemy. Once spent, this effect refreshes after a long rest. And also Ring of Protection. May seem pretty simple here, but also it's a nice little +1 to our armor class and saving throw, pairing well and giving us a very strong armor class of 20, considering that we don't have any armor on at all. Now, as for the weapon choices, because Khainite Assassins and also Witch Elves especially use a lot of dagger and finesse based weapons in combat and oftentimes are dual wielders themselves, I decided to stick with that theme, and thus for the main hand weapon we will be using Blade of the First Blood. 7 to 13 necrotic damage and piercing damage as well. The number you need to roll a critical hit while attacking is reduced by 1, and also we gain the True Strike cantrip as well. Exploit Weakness. Creatures hit with this weapon receive vulnerability to piercing damage. With our offhand using Rhapsody. Scarlet Remittance. Gain a +1 bonus to attack rolls, damage, and spell save DC for every foe you slay to a maximum of +3. So this could really pair well with Killer Sweetheart, killing off 3 minor enemies, or essentially crowd control additional enemies, and then gaining a +3 critical hit and overall maximum damage output on that more difficult enemy. And then Sweet Bloodletting, inflict bleeding when hitting a creature with this weapon while hiding or invisible. And yes, lots of bleed effect proxies here with both the equipment and also our weapons. Alright friends, that has been my character showcase of the Khainite Assassin / Witch Elf build. Let me know in the comments if you would change any of my level ups or also choices in equipment too. And also, if you're a returning viewer or even a new viewer and made it this far into the video, thank you so much for taking the time to check out this character concept. If you want to see more character concepts like this, I'd love to have you join us on those adventures, friends. So remember to hit the like, subscribe, and bell icon notifications, and I'll save you a seat at the table for those next adventures. Take care and farewell.